friendship, marriage is like the promotion from friendship.
Yeah.
So if then someone comes in and starts sharing similar things you would with your spouse, it's invading what you should be focusing on.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the One More Day podcast. I'm your host, SJ.
I'm your host, Divamile.
And we are so excited to talk to you once again for this special episode on...
One more day. One more day.
Oh, is that the theme song we're going with right now? Oh.
It's going to change every week, I bet.
One more day.
One more day.
You're going to wake up the baby.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So, we wanted to talk today specifically about...
Yeah, about what, honey?
Well, we had a list of topics, and the one that my lovely wife here chose was one that I wrote.
Once again.
Yeah, that's fine with me. It is friendships with people of the opposite sex while you're married.
That's right.
And that might not appear to be a big deal for some, but for us, I think it has been an interesting journey seeing things change in that way.
Yeah, I think you can share a lot about it.
I want you to share first this time.
I just think since we got married later on in age, I'm not saying we're 50. Okay, not in our 20s anymore. We've had probably
Post-college.
Post-college, we've had friends from university that are probably the opposite sex, right? Mm-hmm. Or the same, but where you have expressed your most vulnerable moments with, and you've probably became closer than you would have become closer to your spouse since we've been married 2 years, right?
Yeah, I think that what you're speaking of is the fact that when you do get married later on in your 30s, the time that maybe you would have been cultivating with a spouse during your late 20s, you're cultivating with people of the opposite sex who are platonic friends.
That's the word, platonic. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you guys know it's platonic, and you know that there's nothing else there but just the love you have for one another. But does that have to change when you get married? Because I, in my own personal life, have felt like there's been some energy has changed and shifted. But I'll ask you, honey, like, what do you think? Let's talk about, like, I guess the boundaries of that, because I think you can maybe speak to what I maybe have shared with you about it. But what would you deem as appropriate or inappropriate when it comes to friends of the opposite sex that I would have prior to marrying you?
Well, I always think there's a time for everything, right, in life, period. And so when you're now in the season of a time of marriage, it's so important to be intentional. People always use that word when it comes to relationships, but to be intentional, to be present, and no longer have one foot on the side of your friends and one foot in your marriage, or else you miss out on what is the season or the time for your marriage season, right?
Yeah.
So sometimes you can slowly move apart or fall out of friendships that you've had for years because you now want to focus on the new season, which is your relationship in marriage with your spouse. So, we've been experiencing that here in Taiwan. It's been a little different for you because you left your country to come here. And so the relationships that you probably even had in New York, it's hard to reach to them because you're not even there. I don't know, you can share a little bit more if that's even what you're experiencing.
Well, excuse me. What I'm finding is that when you're single for a long time, your friends become your family outside of your family. your blood
Yes.
relatives,
They
because
probably even know more
yeah,
about
they
you.
might know more because they experience you on a more intimate basis because they're around you more. If you're not living at home with your parents and your siblings, you're definitely spending a lot more time with your friends, and that leisure time, just maybe just based on location or just wanting to feel like you have a new life to establish for yourself. You need that separation to just have the independence and carve out your own identity.
Yeah.
However, because it has nothing to do with a romantic connection, however, I think maybe a scientist or psychologist could talk to this. There is a love relationship you have with your friends, whether they have the same sex or opposite sex, but it is, like I said, not romantic. The closeness that you have with them might have an expiration date if there is another person in your life who now fills that void. And as we know, the Bible talks about leaving and cleaving unto, your wife and your husband. And I think for me, the difficulty comes into thinking about how people are fixtured into my routine, and how that routine now changes once I commit my life to being with you.
Yeah.
And I think there is a grieving process, because it's not always this big old to-do or negative thing from either side, but there is an apparent shift that says, well, that part of you has to kind of start to die, because the things that you used to do the way you used to do them, they just can't be done in the same way. Now, that doesn't mean that, like, let's, for instance, we have close friends of the opposite sex, and there's an event, and usually that event you might go with that friend, but now you have a wife or a husband. Maybe that friend can be there with other mutual friends, and your wife and your husband understand the dynamic, and there's love there amongst all of you. That's a mature adult way of, I believe, handling things.
Yeah.
We even see it with actors and actresses who now have a spouse, but then they have a scene partner who maybe they are simulating all types of romantical or intimate scenes with, and there's an understanding there because it's a professional dynamic and it's not anything that goes beyond the set. But in real life, when it comes to a platonic relationship with a friend who might have been kind of like your buddy to go to the movies with or a concert with, that's now your wife. And where that buddy fits in, that's why I said it's kind of a grieving process, because you care for this person, but not more than you care for your spouse. Your spouse, I feel, for a man especially, or for me, is something that you dream of partnering with for the rest of your life. So even when those friends come and go, as the saying is, the friends come and go, that friend will come and go, and they'll find love, they'll find happiness, hopefully, in their lives. But even if they don't, it's not your job to try to kind of soften the wound of them missing you or them not having your presence, and you being the fixture in their lives.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense.
No, it totally makes sense. That's why there's friendship and then there's marriage, right? If you're still holding on to your friendships in marriage, like I said earlier, you really miss out on what can evolve, what can you experience in a relationship in marriage.
In an intimate, romantic relationship.
Yes.
Yeah.
If you hold on to that. And I used to say before, people are there for you but not with you, like I'm with you this season but I'm not for you.
I can see what you're saying. Like your husband and your wife, they are the people that God chose for you, and you chose each other. But the people who are basically the people who love you in your life and they're your friends, they're there for a purpose, right? There is something transactional that happens with friends. Now, your marriage could be transactional if you want it to be, but it can turn into an unconditional relationship.
Absolutely.
And with your platonic friends of the opposite sex, I think that there's just an understanding, at least from most people's perspective. I can't say most, I'm not most people, but from my perspective, I felt like there was always an understanding, like, yeah, we hope what's best for you. And, you have kids after you get married and all these great things happen, and you might live happily ever after. And how that friend sees you might be like, well, yeah, I'll be there rooting you on. But if it, especially for me, geography wise, it's hard to even allow that to progress in front of anyone's eyes.
Yeah.
So I think that's what makes it even feel more difficult and distant for me, because I'm not even able to explain the relationship in a way that somebody can understand, because they haven't even met my spouse.
Yes.
So to be far away, in our case, to be long distance from your family and friends and no one know your spouse, and then you have a child, there's just a certain level of commitment you have to that and be okay with not necessarily turning back so much. Now, you can be in contact with people, but what I've experienced is that contact is pretty much depleting day by day. And it's not just my female friends, it's some of my male friends, if I can even call some people that. And then you start to see that the core friendships you had are replaced by your new life.
Yeah.
And I've heard it many, many times, like, oh, the so-and-so doesn't go out because they got babies. So-and-so doesn't go out because their husband doesn't let them go out, or their wife doesn't let them go out. And I never understood that growing up, watching my parents, who seemed to be so content with them. But, I thought I had that viewpoint that, like, there couldn't possibly be so much contentment with them in that space by themselves. But they made this decision as adults when I was not even a thought, right? So I couldn't possibly at that time understand until I was in my own relationship and marriage. Now I can see why, things like a small group, things like fellowship with church family, things like neighborhood kind of gatherings are important, because I think you can live into your own world on an island unto yourself when you find somebody you love and enjoy it. But because we're not creatures of just our own thing, we're supposed to stretch out to the world. We're supposed to give back to people and impart things to people, which is a big part of this podcast, is giving people our understanding of how we see the world and how we're navigating it. I just think that when it comes to the friend part, especially the opposite sex, there's just that level of, well, maybe that person is also being so respectful of this new journey, but yet you're missing, you're not missing it like longing, but you realize that the void once again has been fulfilled. But I have personally felt bad about it at times, because I'm like, man, am I just leaving people high and dry? And should I feel bad for thinking like that because it's a female friend? But that's my homie. That's like my sister.
I think it can naturally happen too. It's not like you're over there thinking, I'm going to leave my friend now because I'm married. Like, naturally, there are things that happens in marriage where you do make the choice that maybe this part of me does not need to confine on that friend anymore. Or, for example, we try to avoid being on the phone after 9 p.m. because we think it's our time.
Yes.
And we need to avoid anything that may try to invade that quality time, or even sending text, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Those are things we need to be aware of.
Yeah.
And why do we do it? Because we want to build the same time you use for your friends. We want to use that same time in our marriage and see where that takes us to.
Well, let's speak to a raw part. I agree. We want to really cherish that time together. And that's really everybody's cut off, even parents, unless it's a real emergency. You really want to commit to that's quality time with the family you're establishing. But let's talk about the aspect of jealousy in this, right? So would you be jealous if I didn't consider you in the process of just having whatever friends I have of any sex, and just was like, well, this is my friend and we're going to operate exactly how we've been. I'll hug you, but I'll also hug them. I'll kiss them on the cheek, but I'll also kiss you on the cheek. I'll revere them in a room, and also I'll revere you. It's almost like this equal kind of thing. Like, how would that make you feel if I didn't really start to separate and make a distinction of the way that I'm moving?
Well, it's two parts. It's something we've talked about, or we've said this is what we hope not to happen or to happen, but then you do it. Obviously, it would create some sort of negative emotions towards it. But if at the same time, we're friendly people. You know,
Right.
we connect with people easily. We can sometimes end up hugging, counseling people.
Absolutely.
And so we, praise God, we have the Holy Spirit. We can tell when it's like, okay, this is,
Uh-huh.
you know, where's my husband, where's my wife? But I don't think, naturally, yeah, maybe jealousy would come because, like, same thing with you. I'm your wife, you're my husband. If someone tries to take over my role or my position, even if it's a few minutes, it affects me because we're one now. For example, I remember when earlier on in our marriage, we were at the mall, and in the bathroom, I met a lady from South Africa. Just, you know, she was visiting the
She was
city,
not a friend of either one of
Taipei.
ours, yes.
She wasn't a friend, but I was like, oh, she's black. She looks like she's from my side of town, country. Let me say hello. And I did, and she told me where she was from. We walked out of the bathroom, sees you. Suddenly, her focus was now on you, you know? And because we're one, we've noticed that, you know?
Yeah, I think that she was implying that not only meeting with you, you know, bring your husband kind of too. There was an energy like that.
Yes, but you know, I wasn't all of a sudden in her face and be like, "Get out of here!" Or you didn't also give the impression of, "What are you doing, staring at me?" We understood what was happening,
Yeah.
and we left it as that. So that's because we spend time in our marriage to communicate what sort of values and what our relationship should also represent.
But if we hadn't have spent that time, what do you think would have been? I'm looking for a word. Let's see if you'll say it. What do you think would have been the thing that wouldn't make you jealous if we hadn't spent that time? If all we had was conversations without actual physical time spent, what do you think would have kind of helped you not to be jealous?
I know my husband.
And what is that component?
Okay, you gotta finish it.
No, what is that component? You know your husband, so what does you know me mean?
I trust you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I believe that it comes down to trust. And when you're in toxic relationships, how many of us have been in toxic relationships? When you're in toxic relationships, you don't trust that person. And I think that even the element of jealousy would not really spring in my mind, because I would be like, well, I mean, I feel like he's kind of barking up the wrong tree if that's his intention. But Diva Mile has committed herself to me. So even if you had a close friend who did want your attention or had a crush on you, or even just didn't know his boundaries or his place, I would trust you enough to be like, I think that I respect you, but we can't do that anymore. Even if it was innocent.
Yeah.
We can all go, but you and I can't go.
Yeah.
You know, and I don't have a problem with that.
No.
I haven't had to face it because
Yeah.
I've only faced it from afar. But I am interested to see what happens when I go back to the States. There have already
too.
been
Me
some.
too.
There've already been some instances where I thought I was going to be friends with some people forever, and it just, even during the pandemic, things just like 360, like
Crickets.
not even crickets, just, you know, the idea of, one thing I had to learn from male and female dynamics, and I knew before I got married I wanted to break this kind of curse, is I no longer wanted to be, I maybe mentioned this, but you don't want to be someone's surrogate anything, like, unless like a surrogate boyfriend, a boyfriend with no benefits. And so sometimes I think I'll say that some women forget that all the time you're spending with this man who's your friend, he's wanting to give his attention romantically to another woman. So the time he spends with you is just like he's kicking it with his boys. He's not really waiting to see if something's going to happen with you, unless that's his ulterior motive. But genuinely, there are some friends where you're just like, I have no interest romantically with you, but there's a piece of you that has been imparted into my heart that I will cherish forever, like a sister. Even like women in the church, sisters in Christ. But if you don't understand those distinctions, as a woman with that guy, and know where he stands and respects him for that, you might end up trying to give him duties or having an expectation of him that he doesn't have to hold the responsibility in that. Yeah. I'll give you a prime example. There was this incident with a friend, and she called me And when she called me, I was just seeing how she was doing. Make a long story short, she basically wanted to know why I didn't check up on her in some sort of issue she was having internally.
Were we dating at that time, or?
Yes.
Okay.
We were courting. And I was so confused because the friend was adamant about telling me that I was not there for them. And the crazy part is, I wouldn't have known anything about what they were going through unless they told me. But while I'm courting you, and you're the only woman I have in my mind in that way to hold a responsibility to, knowing I would be engaged and married to you shortly after the courtship, I don't know if I had enough room to think about another woman. I shouldn't have had enough room to think about another woman who is not my sister, blood sister, and not my girlfriend at the time, to say, let me go check up on you. Let me find a way to get to you, whether you're at a hospital or wherever you're dealing with, because there's no way of me knowing. But her accusation basically was that I should have been there for her. I should have known, because maybe she's mentioned it once or twice before. But I think the assumption is that I have so much, I'm thinking about her like that.
Yeah.
Where when I do think about my friends, I think about them for the good times, but I'm not thinking about them always on those little details, because
You're
that's
not tied to them.
Right, because that's a responsibility of a monogamous relationship, romantic connection. You know, there's many friends who go through stuff, and they don't even share it with you until later. And then you're like, you give advice, or maybe they'll do it in real time. But are you taking on all their burdens as if you're in that type of relationship with them?
Yeah.
I think that's where the male-female dynamic gets blurred, because some people are thinking like, well, that's my boy, that's my homie, but I can tell him everything. Well, his well is going to be full if he's only thinking about you, sweetie.
That's why I think friendships of the opposite sex when you're younger, it's a lot more fun and innocent.
Yes.
But when you're older and you still got that friend who's the opposite sex, you now really gotta analyze what is this, where is it going?
Right.
As soon as you meet your spouse, that could bring problems. You know, even if it's not opposite sex.
Well,
like
I want to keep it to
family
opposite sex.
Yeah.
Opposite sex is important, because my next question to you was, do you vote yay or nay for, let's say, new friends of the opposite sex in marriage? Hey family, if you've been enjoying this podcast today, please be sure to
subscribe and hit the notification bell.
Thank you so much for your support. Now back to today's episode.
I vote no.
You vote nay.
Yeah.
Why?
I think this is a strong word, but it could be an invasion as well.
I would agree.
I think marriage is like the promotion from friendship.
Yeah.
So if then someone comes in and starts sharing similar things you would with your spouse, it's invading what you should be focusing on with only your spouse.
Especially because the one-on-one then becomes an intimate moment. And now you're married and you're giving a person your time.
Yes.
And you have a new baby, and you have maybe multiple babies, and you're giving this person your time. And they no longer are a person. That's a man or that's a woman.
Yeah.
And you're just like, my wife is out. What did you say, sweetie? Like, and then you may end up saying words like sweetie, because you don't speak to your boys like you speak to a female friend. So there's words that you're not gonna be like, homie. You're not actually gonna say that. So you vote nay. And so those who are already established in the friendship before, they have that place, but then the place changes, the configuration changes.
And if you ignore it, I think something's wrong. It's very obvious things change, but if you avoid it or ignore it, you better
so
do that.
I think that wraps up that thought.
Yeah.
I think that we vote to stay committed to each other in this friendship.
Yes.
And that's the most important thing. And another conversation could talk about couples couple friends who who lead similar lives, I think that's a safe bet. It's almost like old school church group dating.
Yeah.
Because you're always in a safe space where
say
someone else is committed to someone else and no one's worrying about swapping.
Nothing wrong with that.
Nothing's wrong with swapping.
I mean, nothing wrong with having friends that
Right.
are couples.
Having married friends. Absolutely. This is not wife swap, but
Don't want to audition for that show.
right. But we thank you guys once again. Anything else you wanted to say, honey? to wrap
Love
it
you
up?
guys.
We love you guys, and we thank you. We want you to continue to support the channel, subscribe, comment. We have a lot of great things coming up, everything
Yes.
from music to food to fun vlogs and things like that. Check out our website, and we love you, love you, love
Future
you.
merch coming up.
Yes, I mean, we don't, by the time this episode's out, the merch might already be
Yeah,
out. So,
excited about that.
Thanks again for tuning in. See you soon.
Bye.
Bye.